Thank you. Now I shall present Brother Julian. We have waited for him for closer to a month, and we have a longer correspondence, but he's here. He's a wanted man, a wanted speaker internationally. His first topic with us this evening is the cross-eyed Christian. Maybe he can start explaining to us what is a cross-eyed Christian. Brother Julian, without much delay, the pulpit is yours.
He didn't introduce you.
He didn't? Thank you, Donald. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you all for coming out on Friday night. I know you have all had busy weeks, and Friday night is a nice night to just stay at home and relax. So thank you for coming. Feel free to relax here, but not too much. We can't have you going to sleep. Just a small piece of housekeeping before we start. I have a small newsletter that I send out once per month by email. It's only 200 words. So I know we are busy people, so 200 words once a month is very short. And it's called The Bruised Camel. And if you have an interest in faith and finance, then feel free to write your name and email address on one of these boards, and I will take it home and put you down as a subscriber to The Bruised Camel, and then you can receive them from there. So I'll leave one on, maybe one on each side. One here, thank you. Okay, that's the only housekeeping that we need to do. Let's go straight in to tonight's message. The cross-eyed Christian. The cross-eyed Christian. The photograph is done by a New York fashion photographer who is a Christian, and he retired from fashion photography to take photos of the life of Jesus. And so he sets it up with professional models in different parts of the world and takes these photographs. They're beautiful photographs. This, of course, is the story of the rich young ruler. And if you want to know where the rich young ruler is found, it's in a couple of places in the Bible. But one of the places is, you can see down on the bottom right there, Matthew 19, 16 to 22. So he has a personalized number plate just for that. I'm going to start tonight with my testimony. This is my family. My wife, Melinda, in the middle. She is what I call my Proverbs 31 woman. If you want to know what that means, go to Proverbs chapter 31, the last chapter of Proverbs, and read from verse 10 to the end. That's where they described my wife, Melinda. On the right is my eldest son, Ethan. He's studying business at university in Brisbane. And on the left is my youngest son, Jaith, who is in the last year of school. I wish they could be here with me, but they all have their own commitments, and that's how it is. But my testimony starts before them. This is 1971, and this is my parents, Ray and Delphine Archer, and my sister Kathy, and myself, many, many years ago. My father was raised in a church where he had to go to church 8 times every week. Okay? It wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist church, but he went 8 times every week. In a busy week, they would go 11 times. One of his jobs in the family was to make the beer for the whole family. So he would make the beer for his own parents and also for the uncles and the aunties and everybody else. So by the age of 14, he was drinking too much alcohol and he hated church. He hated God because he had to go 8 times a week. He was forced to go. And as he would sit there in church, he would try and work out how he could stop going to church. And he would sit there in a church like this, but it was a smaller church, and he looked around. You know, he had tried everything. He had run away from home. He had screamed at his parents and said, "I'm not going to church." He had pretended he was sick. He tried everything to stop going. And he realized that the only way that he could stop going to church would be if he blew up his church, if he destroyed it. And so he looked at the strong parts of the church, the pillars, different parts, and he went, "Yeah, I can blow it up." So he went home He went to his uncle's farm and he stole gelignite, or dynamite you might call it, and fuses. And he took them home and he hid them in his yard at home. And then he went to school. And when he was at school, he said to one of his friends, "Tonight I am going to blow up my church." Now, normally if a friend comes to you at school and says that, you go, "Ah, yeah, you're joking." But my father, every day at school, he got the cuts. I don't know what you call it here, but the cane across the hand for being naughty, for being in trouble. And so his friend knew that if Ray Archer said he was going to blow up the church, Ray Archer was going to blow up the church. And so his friend told the principal, and the principal told the police, and the police came and took him away. And they said, "What's the problem?" And he explained to them. He said, "I have to go to church 8 times a week, and I want to blow it up." And they went home, they took the dynamite, they took him home, and they took his parents away. And they said to the parents, "You see this gelignite, these explosives, your son was going to blow up your church tonight. Did you know?" And they had no idea. And the police said, "You need to back off on religion. Less religion for this boy." Well, I think they did back off a little bit, but he left home soon after that and got into a lot of trouble and had absolutely no interest in God or religion ever again in his life. He met my mother in about 1968. They had my sister in 1968. I was born in 1969. And they got very busy. My father had done a trade in refrigeration mechanics, so fixing refrigerators. And he had bought a welder for welding metal, and a friend of his said, "Can you make for me a bench press?" Do you know what a bench press is? A piece of gym equipment where you lie on your back and you push the weight away from you. You see, in the early 1970s in Queensland, Australia, the bodybuilding, the gym business was just starting. And so my father made a bench press for his friend and sold it to him and made a profit, a small profit. He thought, "Oh, that's good. I'll make another one." So he made another one and sold that to another friend and made money again. And then another one and another one. And he started a business called Archer Bodybuilding Equipment. And he started to sell it to gyms and fitness centres. And the craze took off. It became very popular. And so he thought, "Well, I'm making all of this equipment and it is cheap for me to make it, so why don't I open my own gym?" And so he opened a fitness centre, a gym himself. And before you know it, it had 1,000 members. And so he opened another one and it had 1,000 members. And then they realised that they can make more money selling protein drinks than they can for gym memberships. And so they opened a health food store as well. So now they have a refrigeration business, a bodybuilding manufacturing business, 2 gymnasiums, and a health food store. And they're 24 years old. They've started them all from scratch. My mother and father are what are called serial entrepreneurs. New business, new business, new business, new business. They keep going. But they had a problem. They were very successful, but they were working 18 hours every day, 7 days a week, and their marriage was absolutely broken. And they had to make a choice between marriage and business. And I thank God that they chose marriage. They sold 4 of the businesses and only kept the health food store, and they went to the bush. I don't know what you call that in Singapore. The park, maybe. I don't know. You've got a lot of people here in Singapore, you know. You don't have a lot of bush. In Australia, we have a lot of bush and not many people. We're the other way around. But the bush is like the wilderness. And they became hippies. They were a little bit late. Hippies were in the 60s, but they were in the 70s. But we went and we became hippies. And we bought a little piece of land, 33 acres. That's about 12 hectares, I suppose, something like that, which is probably a lot of land in Singapore. But where we bought it, it was just a tiny piece of land. On one side was a cattle property of about let me do the maths here into hectares. 1,000 hectares, and on the other side was about 500 hectares, another cattle property. And we had this little one in the middle. And we had no electricity, no running water. We lived in a little shed that was nearly 3 metres wide and about 4.5 metres long. That was our whole house. And that's where we lived. We didn't wear many clothes because we didn't have a washing machine, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have a shower. When we wanted to have a bath, we would walk down the hill into a dam, a pond at the bottom of the hill, and we would wash ourselves and we would walk back home. It was a for my sister and I, it was a very easy way of life, we say a barefoot existence. And it was wonderful. But for Mum and Dad, it was probably quite hard because they were trying to grow their own food and keep running the health food store and that sort of thing. So that was it. And we went from there. My father built another bigger shed for us, and then he built a house for us. And here you can see a picture of them building the house. I don't know, in Singapore, do you have a workplace health and safety? Do you have something like that? Where they have all the rules about how to be safe when you're building? Yeah, we broke all of those rules. But the house was built and nobody died. And we moved into that house. Dad was still drinking, smoking. We were very different to some of the people around us because we were hippies. And they still ran the health food store. So every day, in the health food store in Ipswich, this man, Harry Walker was his name, Harry Walker, would come into the shop and he would buy 1 loaf of bread. That's all. Every day, 1 loaf of bread. We don't know what he did with the bread because he had no children. It was only Harry and his wife at home, but he bought 1 loaf every day. And he would come in and he would say to my mother, Delphine, "Oh, Delphine, how are the children?" Or to my father, "Ray, how is the house building going? Is it going well?" Every day, coming in, saying hello, saying hello. One day, Harry came into the shop and he said to my father, he said, "Ray, somebody is coming to town." The city was called Ipswich. He said, "Somebody is coming to Ipswich to teach about Egypt. They're going to teach about Egypt and history and Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece and Rome and these other places. Would you like to come along? Because I know that you're building a house out of stone and the Egyptians built their pyramids out of stone, so maybe you can learn something." And so my father was like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." And so we all climbed into our old truck and we drove down to the city and we learnt about Egypt. We learnt about a lot of other things as well, and we met some wonderful people. So every Sunday night we would go down and learn about Egypt and then drive back home every Sunday night. Well, the program's finished after 3 or 4 months, and we went back to the bush. And every day Harry kept coming in and buying 1 loaf of bread and saying, "How are the children? How is the house building?" Building a friendship. And one day he came into the shop when my mother was there and he said, "Delphine, somebody is coming to Ipswich and they're going to teach us how to cook vegetarian food. Would you like to come?" And Mum's like, "Oh, that's interesting. I will check with Ray." So she went home and said to my father, "Would you like to learn how to cook vegetarian food?" Now remember, my father was a bodybuilder, okay? Back then, they didn't know that you could get protein from anywhere else except from red meat. And so we were eating a lot of meat. And he said, "No, I have no interest in vegetarian food." And Mum said to him, she said, "I don't really either, but a lot of our customers in the health food store are vegetarians. And so if we learn how to cook vegetarian food, we will be able to sell them more things." And my father was like, "Oh, okay, good, let's go. We can make more money." And so we all climbed in the old truck and we drove down to the Ipswich hall where it was in Ipswich. And when we walked in for the vegetarian cooking program, there in the church were the same people who were interested in Egypt. The same people. Can you believe it? In a city the size of Ipswich, maybe 500,000 people, we run a program on Egypt and a program on vegetarian cooking, and the same people come. Now, we didn't realise that they were all Seventh-day Adventists. We just thought it was a crazy coincidence that all of our friends from the Egypt program were also interested in vegetarian cooking. And so we went to the vegetarian cooking programs, learned how to do that, and we went back to the bush, and Harry kept coming in every day and buying a loaf of bread. And one day Harry came into the shop and said to my father, he said, "Ray, would you like to come to church?" Now, Harry didn't know that my father had been to church 8 times a week until the age of 14. If you do the maths on that, you'll realise that my father had been to church more times by the age of 14 than most of us will go to church in our whole lifetime. And he hated church. He hated God. He hated everything about religion. And Harry said, "Would you like to come to church?" Oh, my dad had to try and make up an excuse. Because you see, Harry was a friend. Harry had become a friend. And so he thought, I know the excuse. And so he said, "Harry, what day do you go to church?" Because he knew that Harry would go to church on Sunday, because that's what he had done when he was young. And Sunday was the only day that our family never went to the city. And so he thought, this is the perfect excuse. And Harry said, "We go Saturday morning, 9:30. Because Saturday morning was the only morning that the whole family did go to the city. Because that Saturday morning is when we went to the city to buy all of our food from the shops for the whole week. So, "Okay, Harry, I will come to church. I will bring my family." So we drove into Ipswich. We bought all of our cold storage, all of our groceries from the shop, and then we drove back to the church. But when we got to the church, we had a problem. You see, our old truck wouldn't lock. The doors wouldn't lock. And we couldn't leave 1 week of groceries in the truck because somebody might steal them. We couldn't put them in the back because they weren't safe. What can we do? So we just packed them all into boxes. The only boxes that we have are beer cartons, beer boxes, because my father drinks lots of beer, and so we have lots of beer boxes. So we put them in the beer boxes, and then we carry them into church on Saturday morning. My father first, we have 1 box each, 4 boxes. Father, mother, Kathy and me, all carrying our groceries into church. My father has a big long beard. I have long hair, even though I'm a boy, because we're hippies, long hair. My father smells of cigarettes and alcohol. My mother will be wearing some sort of crazy dress that hippies used to wear. We looked different, we smelt different, we were carrying our groceries in beer boxes. Everything about us was different. We walked into the church, we put our boxes underneath the seats, and then we sat down on top of them to keep them safe, because we didn't know if we could trust the people, So we sit down there. I give you all of that background for one reason, and that is because when we did that was in the mid to late 1970s, in the Ipswich Seventh-day Adventist Church, not one person said anything to us about the alcohol or cigarettes or how we dressed or how we smelt or buying our groceries on Sabbath. Nobody said anything. They just loved us. They just loved us to Jesus. And for my father and my mother, that was the first time in their life that they met Jesus Christ. They no longer had to hate God. They didn't have to hate religion because they loved Jesus. And why did they do that? Because of this man. Because of Harry Walker. Friendship evangelism. Harry was their friend. And Harry loved them enough to tell them about Jesus. And that, friends, has completely changed our lives. Every one of us here who is a Christian today has a Harry Walker in your life. Somewhere in your family history, somebody has told you about Jesus Christ. Maybe it was your mother, your father was told, maybe it was your grandparents were told. I don't know who was told, but there was a Harry Walker somewhere in your life who did that for you and changed your family's life. Now it's our turn. It's our turn to be a Harry Walker for somebody else. Okay, let's keep going. That's the background. My parents opened up a fruit tree nursery with fruit and nut trees. There were 214 varieties of fruit and nut trees in that nursery. Only a small nursery, but a lot of varieties. And then they became Christians. And they wanted to tell everybody about Jesus. And they didn't know how to tell people about Jesus other than what they had learnt themselves. And so my father said, well, I want to tell people about Jesus, so I'm going to get on a plane and I'm going to fly to Egypt and I'm going to take pictures of the pyramids and Israel and Jerusalem, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to tell people about Egypt and then I'll teach them about Jesus. And my mother said, well, I'm going to learn how to cook vegetarian food and I can teach them how to cook vegetarian food, and that's how I'll tell them about Jesus. And that's what they did. And people learned about Jesus in the little towns around where we lived. And finally they ran out of towns. They had run a program in every town. And they said, we need to move, but we have this little business with the fruit and nut trees. How can we can't go far because with the businesses there, we need to sell the business. And then we can go full-time into lay evangelism, running these mission programs. And so they got their catalogue of fruit and nut trees, 214 varieties, because they wanted to know which one of those 214 that they should keep for the future, because they knew that when they sold the business, then they would run out of money. Finally, they would run out of money. And they thought, well, in the future, maybe there is one tree that we can keep that we will be able to make money from in the future to keep running programs for God. But how do you choose from 214 different varieties of fruit and nut trees which one God wants you to keep? Well, for new Christians, it's very easy. You get a pen and your catalogue and you get down on your knees and you pray. You say, God, do you want us to keep apples? Is there a future for apple trees in Australia? No. Bananas? No. Cherimoyas? No. Durians? No, it wouldn't be durians. No, of course not. And they just went through the list. And God impressed on their hearts. There was no voice from heaven, but God impressed them to keep one tree, and that tree is the olive tree. You know it because of olive oil or the olives that you get on your Subway, the olive tree. And so they kept their olive trees. They sold the business. They put their olive trees behind the car in a trailer and they drove off to the next city to run an evangelistic program. When they got there, they bought a house. They took the olive trees and they planted them in the ground and they ran evangelistic programs telling people about Jesus until there was nowhere else that they could do it. And then they dug the olive trees up and they sold the house and they moved on. And they put the olive trees finally onto a small farm near Brisbane, about 2 hours from Brisbane, and they went off running evangelistic programs all around the place. We began a fruit tree nursery, a small nursery, but only not 214 varieties, only one, and that was an olive tree nursery. At the time, in Australia, there was really a very small olive industry. We were importing about 98 or 99% of our olive oil and olive fruit, nearly all imported. But God knew that the olive industry was going to grow in Australia. And within 4 years of us starting that olive tree nursery, it was the largest olive tree nursery in the world. We then went on from there and had an olive equipment business, an olive magazine, a consulting business. We ran tours overseas, a whole lot of different olive industry businesses. And then we moved into a product called olive leaf extract. You may not have heard of it here in Singapore. There were a few places in Singapore that were selling it for some years. I don't know if it is still here. But olive leaf extract Don't know if there's a picture here. This is what I used to like to do. God was blessing these businesses and making the profit graphs go up very fast. And this is why I got out of bed in the morning. I loved making the profit graphs go up fast, making the sales graph go up in business after business. This is some olive leaves. We extracted a medicine from these, and I can tell you how God led us to that product and how God showed my father how to extract the medicine from it. Beautiful to see God's hand at work in these businesses. We made a medicine from these leaves, and it didn't take very long before we were selling $1 million every month in Australia. We were exporting it to 25 countries around the world, and it was growing very rapidly in a number of different places. There you can see an aerial photograph of 500,000 olive trees that are growing just for their leaves. Nothing for olive oil, nothing for fruit, just for their leaves. God led in those businesses. He helped us with our marketing. He opened doors in manufacturing. He helped us with the government laws about pharmaceutical manufacturing. All these things that were totally new to us, God led and opened doors and protected us. And I can tell you story after story about that, but I won't. The majority of the profits from these businesses was going into God's work. It was going into mission programs and evangelistic programs around the world. It was going into humanitarian programs, all sorts of things around the world for God. My question that I would like to put to you tonight is that when we were running those businesses and the profit graphs were all going up like this, and more money than we could ever dream of was coming in, and we were putting most of it out into God's work, and I was seeing God's hand like every week, every month in the businesses. Do you think, with the profit graphs and everything going like that, do you think that my relationship with Jesus went like that at the same time, or went like that? What do you think? You're in a business, you're running it for God, you're giving lots of money to God's work, you're seeing God active in those businesses, He's pouring in lots of blessings. Does your relationship go like that or like that? Like that. For me, this is my experience, so it doesn't have to happen to everybody, but that's what happened. My relationship with Jesus went down and down and down. You see, on the outside, everything looked good, but there was a problem. 3 things happened to me. 1, I became proud. I became very proud of the success of my family's businesses. So I became proud. Secondly, I became what I call a Pharisee. How that happened, if you read in the Bible, you will see a number of texts where it says, if you are obedient, if you obey me, I will bless you. And so I thought that I must have been being more obedient than my friends because I was being blessed more than my friends. So I started to think that I was very righteous and I was very obedient because I was being blessed more as we ran these businesses for God. And the third thing that happened is I became very self-reliant. I had all the money I needed. I didn't need God. I didn't need anyone else or anything else because I could buy anything I wanted. Of course, I didn't say these things on the outside. I didn't tell people this, but that's what was happening in my heart. And this was the problem. God was blessing me with many gifts, but I was beginning to worship the gifts instead of the giver of the gifts. And I was putting those blessings inside my heart. I had to work out how to stop God's blessings from becoming a curse in my relationship with Him. I had to work out how to stop worshipping His gifts and start worshipping Him again. On the outside, everything looked fine. I was preaching sermons in church, I was taking lessons, we were supporting ministries all over the world. People knew that our family was helping lots of God's work around the world. It all looked great. But in my heart, where nobody else could see, not even my wife, in my heart, I knew that I wasn't saved. I knew that I had lost my first love and that I wasn't saved. And that's a tough place to be. A few years ago, I was trekking up in the Himalayas in Nepal, and I came across this poster up on a wall, right up high in a little tea house, and it's a quote by Mahatma Gandhi. There's a clearer version of it. The fact is, the moment financial stability is assured, spiritual bankruptcy is also assured. Ouch. For the 15 years before I read that poster, I had been doing my best to become financially stable, to become financially secure. But I knew in my heart that I was also becoming spiritually bankrupt. It's very similar to what Jesus said, when he said that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Financial stability and spiritual bankruptcy. Is it possible for a person to be financially stable and not spiritually bankrupt? Well, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. But it is not easy, because it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. Turn with me in your Bibles to Matthew 6. Matthew chapter 6, and verses 19 to 24. Matthew 6, 19 to 24. It's Jesus speaking. He's in the middle of the longest sermon of his that we have recorded, the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5, 6 and 7. And this is what he says in verse 19, from 19 and onwards. He says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth." Is that a suggestion or a command? It's a command. It's a do not. Thou shalt not. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your what? There your heart is also. Let's skip down a few verses to verse 24. Jesus continues. He says, "No one," how many people? Nobody, no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. Julian, you can't serve God and money. That's what he says there. You can't serve God and money. For me, I was like, yes, I can, God. Yes, I can. I can serve you and money, and I'll show you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to run these businesses. I'm going to put all my energy, my time, my energy, everything I have into running these businesses to make a lot of money, and then I'm going to give a lot of that money to you. So that way I'm serving you and I'm serving money. God says, "Julian, you can't do it. It's impossible." And I knew in my heart that I couldn't do it. I knew in my heart that I couldn't do it. But I still wanted to do it. We skipped over a couple of verses there, verse 22 and 23, where Jesus says, "The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" I couldn't work out why Jesus would talk about our eyes in the middle of a section on treasures and money. Then I thought, well, maybe it's because we covet. We covet with our eyes. You know, we see a nice car or a nice condo or something really nice, a nice dress or a nice watch or something, and we go, oh, I really want that, because we see it with our eyes. But as I kept studying the passage and applying it to my life, I saw something different. I saw that what I was trying to do is I was trying to have one eye on my heavenly treasures and the other eye on my earthly treasures, and I was a cross-eyed Christian. And when I tried to follow Jesus cross-eyed, I kept stumbling because I couldn't see straight. One eye on heaven, one eye on earth. God says, Julian, you can't do that. You can't do that because either you're going to love one and hate the other, or serve one and not the other. But that's what I was trying to do. I was a cross-eyed Christian. This is the problem that I had. When my finances went up, my faith went down. I replaced my need for God with money. When I had money, I didn't need God. When my finances went down, my faith went up. I was like, Lord, please pay my bills. Help me. I've got bills to pay here, you know. And then he would bless me, and it would go the other way. This seesawing, teeter-tottering, backwards and forwards. And finally, it was more and more finances up, faith down. And I got to a point, as I said, where I knew that I wasn't saved. There's a lady called Ellen White. She wrote in the late 1800s, early 1900s. She was an American author. When she died, she left behind 100,000 pages of handwritten notes and letters and books and different things. She's the most widely translated female author in history. She's the most widely translated American author, male or female. To give you an idea of how widely translated this lady's writings are, the second most widely translated female in history is a lady by the name of J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series. The Harry Potter series has been translated into 70 languages. This lady has been translated into 170 languages. Okay? So there's a big gap. There's 100 languages between first place and second place. I believe that she had what in the Bible is described as the gift of prophecy. It's a spiritual gift that is given to people. Some are teachers, some are preachers, different roles that are given. Some are prophets. And I believe that she was given that inspiration. So when she writes, I listen, because she writes stuff that it goes so directly to my heart that I know that it must be inspired. This is one of the things that she wrote in 1899. In the history of men, we learn how dangerous is prosperity. Prayers are often requested for men and women in affliction, and this is how as it should be. So when people are in trouble, sickness or relationship problems, whatever, we must pray for them. That's important. But the most earnest prayers should be solicited for those who are placed in a prosperous position. These men or women are in the greatest danger of losing the soul. Isn't that interesting? We pray for blessings. I mean, here in Singapore, you have the prosperity gospel going full bore. I mean, it's all through Singapore. It's all through Australia, America. It's all over the place. The prosperity gospel. God wants you to be rich. This is the message. You know, God wants you to be rich so that you can give it all to other people. Most of it. Well, maybe not all of it. But God wants you to be rich. You know, this is the message that comes through. But what is ignored is the danger of money, the danger of affluence. Ellen White hit it right on the head when she said, when you are prosperous, you're in the greatest danger of losing your soul. When a person prospers, either God gains a partner or the person loses their soul. It's that simple. It's that simple. I'm going to give you a bit of a summary of the whole weekend's talks. There's a lot more good stuff coming in the next 3 talks, but this is your take-home message for tonight. Remember the seesaw we were talking about? Money goes up, faith goes down, money goes down, faith goes up. Here's the solution. As our blessings go up, our knees must go down. That's the only solution that I know. And the more our blessings go up, the more our knees go down. Because when a person prospers, either God gains a partner on their knees or the person loses their soul. It's that simple. I come from Australia. We call it the land of plenty. And it's not just because we have plenty of land. We only have 27 million people and the country is the same size as Europe. So there's a lot of land to go around. We call it the land of plenty. We just set a new record a couple of years ago. Australia has had 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth. So we haven't had a single financial quarter in the last 27 and a half years now where there has been depression or recession. Our economy has grown every quarter for over 27 years. It's a world record. It's never been done before. But what is the impact of that? What has been the impact of that on our nation? This is a guy called Greg Sheridan. He is a Catholic writer for The Australian, which is our biggest newspaper. He said this: widespread prolonged affluence has been more effective than oppression ever was in killing religious belief and practice. To take one figure almost at random, in 1954, 74% of Australian Catholics attended Mass each Sunday. Today, the figure is substantially less than 10%. Okay, that's in less than 50 years. 74% to below 10%. Money, 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 faith, faith, faith. It's a seesaw. There's a company called the Gallup Poll. The Gallup Poll does surveys all over the world. And they ask a whole lot of questions about a whole lot of different things about life. But one of the questions on one of their surveys is religion an important part of your daily life? And they do this. They ask this question in more than 200 countries around the world. And they also find out what the per capita, the per person average income is for people in those countries. And you'll see here that when the annual per person income is less than $2,000 per year, 95% of people are still interested in religion on a daily basis. But when the income goes over $25,000 per year, less than half of the people are still interested in religion. So the money goes up, the faith goes down on a national level. Some of you may have heard of Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse is a financial services company out of Switzerland. They're a secular company, they're not a Christian company. And every year they put out their global wealth data book. And it just has piles and piles of data about money around the world. And again, more than 200 countries are surveyed by these guys. And they get information from the United Nations, they get it from the census, they get it from the governments, they get it from all over, and they pull it all together into their global wealth data book. And one of the things that they look at is the average net worth of adults in each country. Okay? So here, for example, in Singapore, the average adult net worth is $268,000. Okay? So what they do is, if you want to know what your net worth is, you get the total value of your assets, and you take away the total value of your liabilities, your debts and loans and that sort of thing, and the amount that is left is your net worth. The average here in Singapore in 2017 was about $268,000. Who can guess which country in the world has the richest adults on average across all the adults in that country? Any guesses which country? You're going to have to speak loudly. Sorry? I missed it? Denmark? Very close. Yeah, that's right up high on the list. Any others? Norway, that's also very high up on the list. Germany, no, it is high on the list, but not that high. I'll give you a hint. Yeah, that's right, okay. So the adults in Switzerland are the richest adults on the planet on average. Okay? Second place goes to Australia. Okay? Now, when I put up the next slide, you will see Iceland at the top of the chart. I need to fix that, because Iceland came out of nowhere. It wasn't even on the chart in 2016, and then it turned up in 2017. And so I contacted Credit Suisse and I said, what's the situation? And the lady wrote back and said it's an error. So I apologise if there's anybody here from Iceland, but you're not the richest adults in the world. But here it is. Iceland, okay. Switzerland, Australia, the United States, Bermuda, Greenland, New Zealand, Norway, Luxembourg, Denmark, 282,000. Singapore, 268,000. You're not too far down the list. You're probably in the top 15 richest adults in the world as far as the countries go, okay? And then down the bottom here we have some of the poorest countries where their net worth, the average net worth is less than $1,000 per person, okay? But what's very, very interesting is the comparison between net worth and is religion an important part of your daily life, the percentage who answered no. Look how high the percentages are here for people who are not interested in religion compared to down here in the poorer countries. Again, we see the seesaw happening. Look at these countries here. Denmark, 282,000, 80% of the population say they have no interest in religion on a daily basis. My country, Australia, 68% say we have no interest in religion. Okay, so you can see this seesaw happening again. It doesn't just happen in individuals' lives, it can happen in anybody's life. And it can happen in entire nations. Some of you will be looking at that and you'll see something very interesting. Those top 10 nations, the richest adults in the world, what religion were they founded on? Christianity. Exactly. They're Christian nations. And yet they are now, today, the most secular nations on the planet. The only nations on the planet that are as anti-religion as those rich nations are the communist nations, where God has been outlawed. Communism and money destroy a love for God at about the same rate. I'm not giving you this as a Christian researcher. This is secular data put out by secular companies, and they're writing in the newspapers that communism and affluence destroy religion at an equal rate. Okay, so mostly founded on Christian principles. Because they're founded on Christian principles, God blessed them financially. And what did? They walked away from God. In Deuteronomy chapter 5 and chapter 6, the children of Israel are standing on the shores of the Promised Land. Well, they're actually on the banks of the Jordan River, and the Promised Land is just across the river. They've been wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years with very little. And when they cross over into the Promised Land, Moses says to them just before they go over, he says, guys, when you go over there, you're going to eat from vineyards and orchards that you didn't plant. You're going to drink from wells that you didn't dig. You're going to live in houses. In fact, you're going to live in whole cities that you didn't build. You're going to be blessed beyond what you could ever imagine. And what's his very next words? But do not forget your God. You see, Moses knew, God knew, that when we are greatly blessed, we tend to start to worship the gifts instead of the giver of those gifts. Our time and energy is put into the gifts. And that's what happened here. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, wrote this in 1789. He said that wherever true Christianity spreads, it must cause diligence or hard work and frugality, which is careful spending, which in the natural course of things must create riches. And riches naturally create pride, love of the world, and every temper that is destructive of Christianity. I'll show it to you as a diagram. Wherever true Christianity spreads, it must cause diligence and frugality, which in the natural course of things creates riches. And riches naturally create pride, love of the world, and every temper that is destructive of Christianity. That's the cycle that I saw in my life. I was a true Christian. I was converted at 18. I gave my heart to God. I then went into business in my early 20s and worked hard for God. I was very careful in my spending, very frugal, and we became rich. And riches led to pride, love of the world, and everything that destroyed my Christianity. It can happen with individuals, it can happen with congregations, it can happen with entire nations. When I was coming out the end of this this time, I didn't know I was coming out the end of it, but this battle between faith and finance, I was really, really struggling with it. We had just sold our last business number 12, and we had more material blessings than we knew what to do with. We couldn't give them away fast enough. It was somewhere where we had never expected to be. And I knew I was lost at the same time. And I said, God, we have to sort this out. I have to sort this out with you. And so I sat down and I started to write. And it ended up becoming a book. Long story. I didn't want it to be a book, but it ended up being a book. The book is available. You can get it on my website. We can talk about that tomorrow or another time. But because it was becoming a book, I needed a cover for my book. And so I went to a young friend at church and I said, can you draw for me what the inside of my heart looked like in those years when I was battling faith and finance as a Christian, an affluent Christian? And I described to him what it looked like, and this is what he drew. Very talented artist. And you can see that what I had done, this was the inside of my heart. I had taken the blessings that God wanted to give me through those businesses, and sure, we had given lots of it away, but I had also kept a lot of it and put it inside my heart. So when Jesus came and knocked on the door of my heart, Revelation 3:19 and 20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the door and invites me in, you know the verses. I could hear Jesus knocking because I was going to church. I was in a Christian environment, but I was so distracted by the blessings that I couldn't climb over the blessings to open the door of my heart. I was putting all of my time and energy into the blessings instead of into the giver of those blessings. We didn't own all of these things. I should clarify that. These aren't all things that we owned. We sold the Eiffel Tower many years ago. But we didn't own planes and all these other things, but they represented things in my life that God had given us, blessings that He had given us, but things that were now distracting me from my relationship with Him. I was spending all my time and energy trying to care for the blessings, to ensure them, maintain them, grow them, protect them, etc., etc. And I didn't have enough time for God to maintain that relationship with Him. Maybe there's something in that picture. I'll put it up again tomorrow and on Sunday, but maybe there's something in that picture that you know is getting between you and your relationship with God. Maybe it's how much time you spend on screens. Maybe it's holidays or sport or even your academics. Maybe you just like the applause that people give you. Maybe it's cars or jewellery or music or motorbikes. I don't know. Maybe there's something there that the Holy Spirit is telling you, yeah, we need to talk about this. We need to have a conversation about this thing that is keeping you away from me. Or maybe there's more than one thing up there. Ellen White made this statement, the same lady I was talking about before, the same author, she made this statement. Says the true witness, behold, I stand at the door and knock. The heavenly guest is standing at your door while you are piling up obstructions to bar his entrance. Jesus is knocking through the prosperity he gives you. He loads you with blessings to test your fidelity that they may flow out from you to others. Will you permit your selfishness to triumph? Will you squander God's talents and lose your soul through idolatrous love of the blessings he has given? I had never read that paragraph. When I asked my friend to draw that, I had never read that. And yet it's almost a word-for-word description of what I asked my friend to draw. We can't serve God and money. God knows our hearts. But in conclusion, I want you to know that we do need to be cross-eyed Christians. Not because we've got one eye on our earthly treasures and the other eye on our heavenly treasures and we're cross-eyed, but because we have both eyes on the cross of Jesus. In 1 Corinthians 2:2, Paul said this. He said, I determined not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Both eyes on the cross of Christ. There's an old hymn which many of you will know, and it says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." Friends, I stand before you this morning. I'm going to share more on it tomorrow, but I give testimony to that hymn, that when you turn your eyes upon Jesus and look full in his wonderful face, the things of earth do grow strangely dim. And it is strange, because those things on earth are not meant to be dim. They're meant to glitter and attract you and make you want them. But when you turn your eyes on Jesus and you see the beauty of him and you understand the beauty of salvation and you give your heart to him, and many of you know this, it's the most beautiful thing, and the things of earth grow strangely dim. So here was our problem that we looked at earlier. What's the solution? This is the solution. Wherever true Christianity spreads, it must cause diligence and frugality, which in the natural course of things leads to riches. But you see what's come up in the middle? The cross. When the blessings come, we put both of our eyes on the cross. We become cross-eyed Christians. And when that happens, riches leads to prayer and thanksgiving. Our affluence goes up, our knees go down. Prayer and thanksgiving. And the prayer and thanksgiving leads to humble, sacrificial generosity. And that is true Christianity. Cross-eyed Christians. The last verse for the evening is from 2 Timothy 4, verse 7. 2 Timothy is the last letter that we have of Paul's. We know it's his last letter because he writes in that letter that he's about to die. He's in prison in Rome. We know that's where he died. And he writes to Timothy and he says, "I'm about to die." Chapter 4 is the last chapter of the last letter of the great apostle Paul's life. And verse 7 is the second last verse before he goes into his final salutations to young Pastor Timothy. So Paul is going to be saying something really, really important in these verses. Last letter, last chapter, second last verse. And in the faith versus finance battle, it reminds me of something very, very important that I need to remember every day. And this is what Paul said to Timothy. He said, "Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the finances." Is that what he said? No. He said, "I have kept the faith." And that's my challenge to you tonight, friends. Keep the faith. Keep the faith. In the faith versus finance battle, keep the faith. Tomorrow morning at, I think, 11 o'clock, I'm going to share the second part of my testimony. So tonight we had the first part. Tomorrow morning we're going to have the second part. It's my favourite part. If you can possibly be here at 11 o'clock, I'd love you to come. It's called Heart Attack, and it talks about my conversion, my second conversion, and the change that it made in my life, the beautiful, eternal change that it made in my life. So thank you for coming out tonight. I don't know, we finished with prayer now? Okay, Don's coming up. Thank you.